Okay, so the first lesson is just looking at MATLAB desktop. As you see, I have a part here, it's called editor. For now, if you open it, you just have, let me clear this. Something like this is called command window that you can type your codes here. There is a current folder here that is where you can save your stuff basically. And then the details about those files are here. And then workspace is where you save the variables that you defined in command window. So going back to Octave, it's the same thing. So you have command window, you have your file browser where you can save your stuff, workspace, command history, whatever you type here will be in command history until you delete it. So we start by typing here, just getting comfortable with coding, with some simple coding, and then we move on to write it in an editor, which is called a script here, and save it. Then you can save a file, use it later, because it's a programming language, right? So you want to save it, send it to someone, send it to a customer. So you need to save it somewhere. But for now, it's just for the first lesson, I type here in command window. What is MATLAB? MATLAB is basically a software for mathematical computation, like signal processing, data analysis. This is the best software that you can use. What MATLAB stands for, it's very important to know because then you get why it works that way. MATLAB doesn't stand for, because usually people say mathematics laboratory. No, MATLAB stands for matrix lab. Why? Because mostly MATLAB is used when we work with matrices and we have group of numbers and we want to analyze them. That's why we use MATLAB. So it's called matrix lab. So even if you have two, if you type 2 in MATLAB, MATLAB will look at this as 1 by 1 matrix. So again, MATLAB looks at everything as a matrix, which is very important in mathematical operation and engineering, because we usually have a set of data that we want to analyze, and that set of data is usually put in a matrix to group them. And then when you want to analyze them, you use MATLAB. Okay, so I don't know if you have any background in any programming language, but MATLAB is pretty much one of the easy ones to understand. It's very straightforward compared, for example, to C or Python. For example, when you start programming C++, you have to define everything when you write a code. For example, you have to say, okay, this number is an integer, so save this much memory for 2, because 2 is an integer. Whereas for MATLAB, you just type 2, and by default, MATLAB will know that it is an integer, and it will save some memory for it. So you don't have to basically explain everything, every number to MATLAB, because MATLAB is a software for numbers, basically. It works with numbers. So by default, it does the job for you. Now, for the first lesson, what I'm going to do, I already talked about the windows, what everything is, and this command window is where I'm going to type my stuff today. And this sign that you see here is called command prompt. So if you type something and then press enter, you get the answer, and then another command prompt. So what happened here? I typed 2, and I just typed 2, And what appears is that 2 is equal to answer. And then when you come to this workspace, you see that, oh, the name is ans, which I didn't put it, right? It came by itself. So what MATLAB did is that it puts a name for 2. How do you read this? You read it like this. MATLAB put 2 in a variable ans by default. You can define anything you want to 2 be in. For example, if I say x equal to 2, then another variable is created here, and the value is 2. Now, pay attention here. You see it says dimension 1 by 1. So that means it's looking at your number as a matrix, as a 1 by 1 matrix. You see? Same thing for x. So you just type a number, and automatically MATLAB will put it in a variable, by default ans. Now my ans was 2, now it's 5, you see? And by dimension is 1 by 1, and it's, what does it mean, class double? That means that MATLAB looks at it as a number with a floating point, and so it can be 5, 0, 0. It can be, if I put 4.6, you see, it's in the same class. So it looks at even the integer number that's double. That means numbers with decimal points. Okay. So now what am I doing here? I want to start the lesson with so what I'm trying to do here is that I'm talking about variables. In every programming language, when they start C++, Python, the first lesson is about variable. What does it mean, variable? It's just something that I put a number inside for this case now. So you need, how do I say, like always in programming, when you define a number in any programming language that you see, when you define a number, then let's say 2. Eventually you want to call 2, right? So how do you call 2? You have to give it a name. And now my a is a variable. So I put 2 into a. Don't read it as a equal to 2 in any programming language, because equal in programming languages are 2 equals. So when you say a, when you see this sign 2, that means I'm putting 2 into a. Now, because this is a programming language called MATLAB, MATLAB puts 2 in a 1 by 1 matrix, and then put it in a variable a, and say this type of this variable is double. What does it mean, double? That means it can, MATLAB puts some part of memory to put 2 there. That memory is assigned double. That means it can have decimal points. This memory can either save 2 or 3.2 or 2.1. That means you have a space for the decimal points. That's what double means. Okay, so by now you should feel comfortable with just defining numbers for MATLAB. And so you have to give them names, and you have to define them as a variable. So I can say a is equal to 2. So now a is 2. Then, for example, b is 9. So we are starting with very simple calculation. Now, a is 2, b is 9, a is 2, b is 9. Then if you add a plus b, you should get 11, right? So I press enter, and I get 11. So the first lesson of MATLAB is usually just using MATLAB as a calculator. But when you use it as a calculator, I want you to always pay attention to this workspace and see exactly what's happening. Everything is saved there as basically a matrix. The value is there, the class is there, and the names are there. Okay, so let's use MATLAB today as a calculator and then move on. So how do you use MATLAB as a calculator? First, you have to know what are the operators in MATLAB. How do you define the operators? So in maths, you have seen plus, minus, multiplication, division. But now you're typing. How would you type these? So plus is plus. In MATLAB, same thing. Minus is minus, same thing. You don't have this on your keyboard, right? So you have to type a star sign for multiplication, for division, backslash. So a simple calculator, now you can use it as a simple calculator. Another one is power exponentiation. So for example, if you want to do 2 power of 3, in MATLAB, you define exponentiation with the caret sign. So that will be 2 power of 3. This caret sign will define power. So now you have a simple calculator, and you can use your MATLAB at least for the first lesson as the simple calculator. So you can say 7 star 8, that means 7 times 8, and it's 56. Because I didn't put it into anything, by default it will be saved into ants. If you don't define it, it will be into ants. If I define it, for example, Q is equal to 7856 divided by, for example, 4, then the answer will be saved into Q. The value, the dimension, everything. So that's division, multiplication, adding. Now, for example, you can, Q is your number, you can subtract it from, for example, A. So A is already saved here, so MATLAB will understand what you're talking about. You are subtracting Q, which is 2189, from 8, which is 2. So now you have 2187. Okay, and the caret sign, 2 power of 5, for example, 32. So now your answer is 32. Okay, so we have, so for this lesson so far, I want you to get Octave and try to use it as a calculator for the first lesson. Just type some numbers in command window, try it out, and feel comfortable with entering different operators. That should be your first exercise, basically, to feel comfortable with the numbers. And then you might ask, okay, these are only numbers, but when you started, you told me that MATLAB stands for Matrix Lab. So what is matrix? Matrix is just a group, as you know by now, when you have group of numbers or expressions. For example, something like this simply is a matrix, right? So this is a 3 by 3 matrix. So MATLAB is very useful when you want to analyze arguments, elements inside the matrix. Now, okay, but I don't want to jump into matrix. I want to start from arrays because I already worked with numbers. Now I want to go slowly into arrays. Arrays are a special type of matrices which are usually, they're one-dimensional. They're also called vectors. For example, 5, 2, 3. If you have something like this is a horizontal array, which is 1 by 3 matrix, right? or you can have vertical arrays or vectors. So something like this is an array. It's or 3 by 1 matrix. So these are arrays. So I start by working with them before jumping into matrix so we can slowly build our knowledge. So when we get into matrix, it's more comfortable for us. Okay. Now, how would I, first of all, how would I create these? Okay. Just want to show you a keyword. If you want to get rid of all of this, if you get a headache looking at this, and you want to start fresh, you can type CLC and everything will be cleaned up, but you see your workspace is still there. So if you want just to clean your screen, type CLC. If you want to get rid of everything here as well and use these variables for other things, type clear all. And everything will be cleared. Okay? So CLC cleans your screen. Clear all will clear all these, your workspace, basically. Okay. Back to array. Now I want to create an array. There is a difference between this and this when you type it in MATLAB. This is easy. For example, let's say I want to say x is equal to 5, 2, 3. 1 by 3 matrix. You just type it x is equal to 1, 2, 3. Okay? So now x is, you see in your workspace, it's an array 1, 2, 3. Now you can work with it or do some calculations on it. Now you have a 1 by 3 matrix and it's here. Okay. Now what about this one? What about vertical array? For vertical array, you have to use a semicolon. That's the difference between these two. So if you want to define that in MATLAB, what you do, let's say this is equal to y. What you have to do, you say, okay, y is equal to 8 semicolon 7 semicolon 3. Although you write it like this, MATLAB will interpret this as this, 8, 7, 3. So it will be vertical. So if I say y is equal to 7 semicolon 5 semicolon 3, am I in MATLAB? Oh, I want to go to Octave. Okay. So yeah, I want to stay in Octave because you probably have Octave. So x is equal to 1, 2, 3. So you see you have value 1, 2, 3, dimension 1 by 3, name and everything. Now, if you want to get a vertical one.
Miriam, does it matter if you space them or not when you're typing it in?
Yeah, it matters because then it will be 12. That would be 1, 2, 3, 123, right? So you have to put a space or comma.
Okay.
Very good question. And then for vertical, you put 3 semicolon 6 semicolon 7. Now it will be vertical. If you click on it, it will look like this. Okay, so this is how MATLAB would know if you are defining horizontal or vertical arrays. Okay, good. Now you want to do some operations on them, mathematical operations. Let me start with maybe multiplying a number to this one. So if I multiply 5 to x, so be careful, guys. When you multiply 5 to x and you have an array, 5 will be multiplied into each element. Okay, so when you say 5, times x, it will be multiply to 1, then multiply to 2, then multiply to 3. So you see you have 5, 10, 15. So when you multiply a number, it will multiply to each element. Same thing for y. You can say 6 times y, and 6 will be multiplied into each element. So 6 times 3 is 18, 6 times 6, 36, 6 times 7, 42, right? So that's one thing you have to remember, every element. Now, how would you multiply two arrays together? I have to, it was much easier teaching this before 2016, at least to novice students. They added a feature in MATLAB after 2016. I created a video, it's called implicit expansion. And if you go and watch it, I explain that why sometimes when you get some values that you didn't expect before. So I can, okay, now I explain what I mean by implicit expansion. So now you have two arrays, right? You have 5, 2, 3, and you have 8, 7, 3. Okay, so how would you, before going to implicit expansion, let's say you want to multiply two matrices for some application. Let's say for some application, you need to multiply two arrays with the same size. And you want each element to be multiplied to the next element. Let's say for some application, you need this. The good thing about MATLAB is that you can do that by putting a dot before multiplication. Or putting, if you want to divide them, you put the dot before division. Or if you want to say this power of this, this power of this, this power of this, you put a dot before caret. So what does this dot mean? When you see a dot, it means element by element. Okay? So dot means element by element. So if you, for example, if we go back to Octave, so I have, but the size of your arrays should be the same. That means if you have X like that, and if you, otherwise you'll get an error. And then you have 3, 4, 6, for example, 3, 4, 6 is your Z.
Vertical and do they need to be both vertical, or can you times vertical?
Can you repeat, please?
You said they need to be the same size, but can you go a 3 array in the vertical or in the horizontal and times it by a vertical 3?
Yeah, you can do that. I'm talking about element by element. If you want to do elements by elements, they have to be the same size. If you just want to multiply like you do in math class, then you have to follow the rules, right? So, for example, when you have 3 by 5, then you have to multiply to 5 by 1, right? These two should be the same. So that's the rule. But if you want to do element by element, then you have to put the dot, and the sizes should be the same. Does that answer your question? Yeah, okay. So now if you do x dot z, okay, so 3 by 1 is 3, 4 by 2 is 8, 6 by 3 is 18, right? So each element got multiplied by its corresponding element. So that's what dot does. Now, other than that, you should get the same results as in your math class as here. Now, if you go here, if you want to multiply this to that, now this one is 1 by 3. This is 3 by 1. Now, if you have 1 by 3, 3 by 1. Okay. Now I want to talk about implicit expansion. Let me find my note for any questions so far? So we talked about scalar numbers, and we talked about arrays so far. Okay, I don't know, where's my note? Okay, now, and you know how to do, so far you should know how to use MATLAB as a calculator, so you know that, and you should know how to do, how to create arrays, vertical and horizontal, and you should know how to, if for some applications I ask you to multiply each element by element, you should know the how to use dot. Okay, so we know all of that. Now, there is another window I want you to introduce you to, but I'm not going to use it. I just introduce it. If you do new script a script comes here, and you can type whatever I told you. For example, you can create an array, another array, add them, and get the result, and then save this. So this is another window that we are going to use at the end, but for now, just command window, which is here. Now, let's try something. Let's say now I want to multiply x to y. So if I multiply x to y, now my x is 1 by 3 matrix, and y is 3 by 1 matrix. So I'm multiplying them together. So now it's worse, right? Because y is 36, exactly what you do in math. You have 1 by 3 matrix, which is this one, right? And you have 3 by 1 matrix. When you multiply them, what you get is 1 by 1 matrix. So this gets multiplied to this, plus this gets multiplied to this, plus this gets multiplied to this, and you get a number 36, which is here. So the same rules applies to multiplication. Now let's add them. X plus y. You see, you get a 3 by 3 matrix, which can be odd. As I said, before 2016, you should get an error, because how would you add this to that when the sizes are not the same, right? So usually when you add two matrices, the sizes should be the same. So that's where implicit expansion comes from, because I added this to this, and I got a 3 by 3 matrix at the end. Okay, so what does MATLAB do? It's not a bad thing. It was needed that they added this feature. It's a very neat trick if you understand what it's doing, and then you can use it when you need it. Otherwise, it might surprise you. You say, okay, I'm adding two matrices that are different sizes, and then all of a sudden I get 3 by 3 matrix. So I just explained what's happening here. What's happening is that when one of the arrays have size of 1, MATLAB will, this is 1 by 3. It's called implicit expansion. So it will expand until these two are the same. So now I have 5, 2, 3. It will add 5, 2, 3, 5, 2, 3 here and make it a 3 by 3 matrix. And here it will add 8, 7, 3 3 times. And then adds this 3 by 3 matrix to this 3 by 3 matrix and gives you this. Why I'm telling you this? Because I don't want you to go and do this and get shocked because you think you should get an error. So if you want to, first of all, these should have, like, you should have something in mind when you add them, and you should expect to get this kind of result. So you should know that in advance. Otherwise, if you do it by mistake and don't realize that you're adding two matrices with different sizes, then you might get an answer that surprises you. So, for example, I know that I read it online that a guy was debugging a code, and he was saying that it was working with MATLAB that was released before 2016. It was giving me a different answer, and then when I run it with a MATLAB that is released after 2016, I'm getting another answer, and he was all confused. This is because of this new feature, implicit expansion. So I put more examples in the video, implicit expansion. So if you're interested, go and watch it. But I just wanted to give you a heads up that MATLAB does that. So be careful with your dimensions if you want to get the answers that you get in your maths class. So you have to be careful with the dimensions and everything, because if you mess that up, you might get answers that are surprising. But this feature was needed, so they put it for a reason. It becomes more clear when you work with more advanced material. Okay. So far, I started by talking about a scalar, just numbers, and used MATLAB, or in this case Octave, to just do some basic calculations using it as a calculator. Then I moved on into arrays, and I talked about some basic calculations. I talked about terms by term, multiplication, division, exponentiation. And if you want to add two arrays, they have to be the same size. Otherwise, you might get numbers like this, all of a sudden, like 3 by 3 matrix. That's because of implicit expansion. So we talked about that. I talked about the windows. This is a command window. You can type for the couple of first lessons. It's fine to type here. Eventually, we'll go here and type everything into a script. And I also showed you how to clear your screen, CLR. CLR. I clear all, and CLC. Okay, now the next part I want to talk about in the first class was if you don't know, like, a keyword that you see in MATLAB, for example, because it's software that are used for mathematical analysis, right? That's why there are lots of keywords that can be used that you use in math. For example, when you want to take, and this will come like natural for you when you see them, then it's easy to remember because the keywords, they all make sense. For example, if you want to take a square root of a number, so how would you do it with MATLAB? There are keywords that somebody else wrote the function, you can just use it. So for a square root, for example, you use sqrt. So there are lots of keywords like this. For example, cosine, you just type cosine of and then you put a number. And for example, pi will be pi. So as we move on in this course, you will get comfortable with all these keywords, and they are easy to remember because, as I said, they are just, they make sense. SQRT, for example, is a square root. So going back, I wanted to talk about help. So if you don't know if something, what it does, you can always type help. So help SQRT, and then you see, I typed help SQRT, and then MATLAB explains for you. Compute the square root of each element of x. If x is negative, a complex result is returned. So it's awesome. If you're looking at a code and you don't understand, then you just type help, and it will come. Okay. Another keyword that you can use is demo. Okay, maybe Octave. Demo. Okay. Okay, so this one works with MATLAB maybe. So for now, just stay with help. So anything that you need help with, just type help. So help cosine, help cos. Cos is a built-in function from the file. Cosine of x, compute the cosine for each element of x in radians. So, so for now, just let's stick into help, and then I'll use demo later. So that's a very helpful keyword I wanted to talk about. And then the next thing I want to talk about is how to plot something. This is very easy as well because you just type plot. So again, let's say I don't know how to use plot function. I just type help plot, and the information will come. So you see even how to change the color. Everything is here. All this information. So help plot. Plot is a function from the file, blah, blah, plot y, plot xy. So it explains it. So let's say I want to plot, for example, okay, before doing that, I have to, because for plotting, I want to use lots of numbers. So let's say I already showed you how to define an array, but it's not easy to type all of this. For example, if I want to plot something time, right? Am I going to define all of these numbers? It doesn't, it's not feasible. It's doable, but it doesn't make sense. So there is a keyword that I'm going to use. It's called linspace. What does it do? So it's very useful for plotting when you want to plot something, because usually, for example, in 2 dimensions, let's say it's time versus something, right? Versus distance. And then you have your time, you are going to save it into an array. Am I going to type all these numbers? No. So one way is to use a keyword called linspace. So this is a very useful keyword, linspace. How would you use it? So you put the first number and your last. Let's say I want to go from 0 to 100 seconds. So you type linspace, t is equal to linspace 0 to 100, and then you want to divide them equally into, I don't know, like 80 numbers. You want to have 80 numbers divided equally for time. you put 80 here. So when MATLAB comes here, it will say, okay, so T is an array from 0 to 100, and then you want 80 numbers inside your array, spaced equally, right? So it will go from 0 to 100, and then divides it. So you have 80 numbers. Instead of typing all of these numbers, this is what you can use. So let's try it out. For example, I can say T is equal to linear space going from 0 to 180. You see, I have 80 numbers are here, and T is here. One thing I want to tell you, if you don't want to see all of this in command window, because everything is saved in workspace, right? So you have a 1 by 80 array. You don't want to see it here, just put a semicolon. So if I put a semicolon at the end and press enter, you don't see it. It's saved here, but it doesn't make your command window messy. And it's easier to follow for you. So if you don't want to see it, put a semicolon at the end. Now you have an array for T. It's, as I say, it's a very useful tool for plotting. So you don't have to type all of your arrays. And then let's say I want to, so I'm plotting, right? So it's T versus something. Let's say X in my y-axis, or let's call it Y. And let's say I want it to be sine of T. So every number in this array, its sign will be Y. And I'm going to put a semicolon here. So I have Y, 1 by 80. Okay, this is another thing. So I'm taking sine of T, and T is an array, right? So sine of T again would be sine of each element of the array. So you have different numbers, okay? And then how would you plot it? You just type plot T, Y. And it gets plot for you, right? And then you can label it, you can put a title as you go on. Okay, so I'm going to just do a review of what I said so far. I started with introducing you to the tables. Then I said, okay, if you have a number in MATLAB, MATLAB will look at it as a 1 by 1 because MATLAB stands for matrix lab, so everything is a matrix. Then if you put it in a variable, that means you can call 2 by A. So if A is 2, B is 5, then you can call them by name. A times B, what is it? Okay. And I talked about all the operators because I started with a scalar, just one number. And I said, this is multiplication, this is division, this is exponentiation, plus and minus are the same. And you can use it as a calculator. Then we moved on and I said, okay, now that you know how to work with numbers, let's talk about arrays because eventually I want to get into matrices. So I talked about these two types. I mean, you can have either horizontal or vertical. There is no other way. And I told you how you can create them. You can either put a space or put a comma. It's the same thing. Then, but for this one, you have to put semicolon. So if you want to define something like this, in MATLAB, you define it as 3, 5, 4. And then I moved on and talked about element by element, multiplication, division, or exponentiation. If you want to do that, you should have two matrices with the same size, and then you put a dot before your operator. And then you can use them as element by element operator. And there are applications for that, of course. So if you want to do that, then dot is your answer. And if you have an array, for example, something like this. If you say cosine of A, what it means for MATLAB is that go take the cosine of each element in the array. So cosine of 5, cosine of 3, cosine of 4. Okay, so any expression that you use sine of, for example, or log of, log for MATLAB is log. Log of A, it will take log of each element. What about exponential? What is exponential? E, you have seen it before, or I'm sure during your studies you have seen exponential. If you haven't, it's okay. But if you have, if you want to say exponent of 5, for example, in MATLAB, it's exp. Don't get scared by all these keywords. You will see them like 1,000 times. It will all become clear. But for now, just know that when you use them for an array, it will be applied to each element. That's what you have to know. The rest, they just come with practice when you see different keywords. So I talked about that. Then I moved on and said, okay, now if you want to plot two arrays versus each other, it's really hard to write down all of this, right? And then I introduce you to a keyword called linspace. And I use it in a way that I can put my first number here, my last number here, and how many elements I want. When you define how many elements you want, the space between elements are set equally by MATLAB, and then you have your array. And then you can apply an expression to have your other axis, for example, y, and then you can draw anything you want. What's the keyword for drawing? It's plot. So you have seen that as well. And what else I talked about? I talked about help. So if you don't know what a keyword does and you see it in an example in a book, just ask for help by typing help and then anything you don't know what they mean, for example, log, and then MATLAB finds it for you. And it's very good explanation, actually. It's very helpful. So help is your best friend. And this is where you find all your variables, your results. This is where you can save your stuff when you start working with this. And this is your command history. And clear all will clear all your variables. And CLC cleans your house. Okay.